Hi, I'm Debbie, and this is Book and Bujo, where I talk about all things books, bullet journals, and stationery. Welcome if you're new, welcome back if you've been here before. Today is my August stats and wrap-up. Let's change it up a little bit this month, and let's start with the books and do the stats at the end. I had 12 books on my TBRopoly TBR, and I rolled one double, so that's 13 books. And then, of course, I had 4 extra books that I read for Readathons for a total of 17 books read in August. Not my highest, but also not my lowest that I've ever had. My highest, I think, was one of the Magical Readathons, and I had like 31 books or something like that, but a lot of them were kids' books and short stories, so that, I feel like that doesn't really count. So full length, the books, 17 is pretty darn good. We'll start with my TBRopoly, and then I'll quickly talk about the 4 that I did for Readathons, but I did talk through those a little more in depth in my August Readathon wrap-up, which I will leave up in the cards up above for you and also in the description box below in case you want to check that out. For my first roll, I had landed on 24 in 2024, and for that I read The Sleeper and the Spindle by Neil Gaiman, and I thought this was a really interesting story. So this is a mashup of a Snow White and Sleeping Beauty retelling, and I loved the little twists he put on the characters and how they kind of interacted with each other. I thought that was super fun. I would highly recommend it. And it has kind of more of an adventurous feel to it. The audiobook was wonderful and thoroughly enjoyable, and I gave it 4 stars. Next up was to read a classic, and for that I read Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky, and I also gave this one 4 stars. It was an interesting book. A little different from what I'm used to. So we're following our main character who is contemplating murder, and it's kind of his thought process through the beginning to the end when the deed is done, and then the consequences that come from that afterwards. And it's interesting, totally a different perspective. I liked getting to know a different culture from mine and also seeing a different mindset from mine. Definitely an interesting book. A little over my head with the writing style and just being a classic and the content of it. I did enjoy the read. A little frustrating at times. Some of the characters in there are a little infuriating. But overall, I'm glad I read it, and I can see why so many people love it. Next up was a priority read, and I chose one of my Around the Disc in 800 books for the Discworld read-along, and that was Snuff by Terry Pratchett. And this is the 39th book in the Discworld series. There's 41 books in the series total, and I am so close to being done. But I thoroughly enjoyed this book. 5 stars. Commander Vimes. I am team Commander Vimes all the way. I love his character, and it's just so much fun. The snarkiness and just the way his mind works is wonderful. I love it. I really like how Terry Pratchett writes Vimes' character and how Vimes deals with species equality or race equality. So, you know, the dwarves, the trolls, the zombies, the werewolves, the humans, and how he treats all of them. And I think it is beautiful and very respectful, but also the writing style keeps it fun and a little more lighthearted instead of taking it so seriously that it just makes it over the top. It keeps it respectful and more lighthearted. In Snuff, Sam Vimes is forced to go on vacation because, you know, he just likes to work. He doesn't want to go on vacation. And he is then forced to go on vacation by Lord Vetinari and his wife. So his wife and him and little Sam Jr. all go out to the country estate to have a little holiday. And, of course, he's not just going to be sitting around. Something's going to find him, and he stumbles across a little bit of a something while out in the country. The rest of the story is a very entertaining and interesting mystery that he must solve, and I love all the side characters and the little rambling roads that he takes around the main story, and the beautiful way that some of these other characters are treated. It's wonderful. I love it. Of course, treated by him. By others, not so much. But I love how Commander Vimes treats all of the other characters in the story. Then I had a book with sprayed edges, and I used my reward prompt to double up on a prompt. So I could take 2 prompts and read 1 book for it, and I did that in August because I definitely needed to. And I chose The Fangs of War by E.J. Doble, and this one I used for a book with sprayed edges and as a physical book. This is a hardcover, so I enjoyed this one. It's E.J. Doble's debut book, and he's a youngin'. I believe he's in his early 20s, and this is very impressive for a first-time writer. I think he did a really good job. There are some parts in the story, I guess some of the language used and some of the way some of the phrases flow. You can kind of see a little bit that he's kind of an early author, but overall the story is amazing. I gave it 4.5 stars. The characters are interesting. There's a couple characters in particular that I really like, and they're dynamic together, like very devoted to each other, and seeing what war and turmoil will do to a friendship, sometimes bringing it together and maybe sometimes tearing it apart. And I love how that story unfolds in this book. Of course, there's war and betrayal, there's backstabbing, there's amazing friendships and heartbreak, and I loved where this went, and I would like to see where the next book takes us. Very interesting. I would highly recommend you check it out. The Fangs of War by E.J. Doble. Next, I had to play someone else's TBR game, and I played the Library Unbounded's Lord of the Reeds TBR game. And for that, I had to read a sci-fi, and I read The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and that is by Becky Chambers, the first book in the Wayfarer series, and I loved it. 4.5 stars. It was so good. Actually, it's probably more 4.75 stars. It was really good and interesting. I thoroughly enjoyed it from beginning to end. The characters were all very well developed, and I liked the friendships and how open they are with each other, and the way they stand up for each other, even in the midst of turmoil. And sometimes friendships are tested just as hard in times of peace and tranquility as they are in turbulent waters. So I always find that interesting, and I liked all the dynamics of how things played out in this book. I loved all the diversity of all the characters and the way they were able to find a way to live in harmony with each other, which is beautiful. And the plot was really interesting, and we had a little bit of cliffhanger moving us into book 2, which I did read in September. Spoiler, I loved it, but not as much as the first book. There was also a couple of interesting twists, especially involving one of the characters. I'm interested to see how that would play out in future books, but this is a duology. I don't think there's any other ones, but I would love to see how the crew from the first book moves forward from where it ended. I thought it was a great cozy sci-fi with a little bit of action to keep things interesting. Next, I had to read a big book over 500 pages, and for that I read Nightfall by David Estes, and this is the 4th book in the Kingfall History series, and I love this series. It's so good. High epic fantasy. We have dragons, we have war, we have a lot of political intrigue going on here, and we have the god blades. So we have the light blades, the shadow blades, and there were some interesting developments and some insights that come up in this book around the shadow blades especially, and I find it very intriguing, and I really want to know what's going to happen in Endfall, which is the final book. I should be reading it in October, but I'm probably going to push it off to November just because of my 13 spooky reads that I do every October. We'll see. If I have time, I'll fit it in. If not, then I will move it to November. But, oh, I love this series. I mean, things in this book, we have some insights, but things are also getting a little crazy. We have some betrayals happening. We have some new friendships, some interesting family dynamics, war, reunions, and so much more. I do miss we don't get one POV, which is one of my favorite POVs. I have a few favorite POVs, but he's one of them, and Over Your Helm, and he is not in this book at all. So that was a little bit of a bummer, but I can understand why he's not, because things are happening in other places than where he is. So I'm hoping that he comes back in as a main POV in the last book, which I'm assuming he will. And for those of you who've read Fate Marked, I love that we get to see more of Gwendolyn Storm, as she is hero marked, and she is one of the tattooed, which is the magic system that is in the Fate Mark series. So that's on a different continent, but built in the same world. And I always love when David Estes kind of puts those little Easter eggs and kind of connects the two series together a little bit. So again, you don't need to read the Fate Mark series to read Kingfall Histories, but it's nice to kind of see those little bits and bobs in there. Also, his next series, which comes out soon, I believe the first book comes out either at the end of this month or next month. I think it's the end of this month. Forsworn series is also in the same world. So I'm interested to see how the three are going to come together in the end. Be interesting. That one will also be a 5-book series. And then the postludes that are in here continue to add so much to the story, with some important side characters that some have already made it into the main story and others are still kind of on the periphery. So we'll see how all that comes together. And then also more backstory just on how some of the characters became who they are now. So some of the backstories are on their ancestors, but that still kind of built their character. And I do have to say, I think my favorite, we'll say, race or species that is in Kingfall Histories are the Grizzari. Oh my gosh. I mean, give me some snark any day and I am all there for it. Some nice dry humor and a little snarkiness. Chef's kiss. And the Grizzari, yes, have that in spades. I love it. I love the Grizzari. Next one was a 5-star prediction, and for that I read Of War and Ruin by Ryan Cahill, the 3rd book in the Bound and the Broken series, which again, I love this series. Another high epic fantasy, and I am here for them. So good. I talk about this one a little more depth in my readathon wrap-up if you want to check that out. And I love all of the main characters and how they're all starting to come together, and some of them like growing into their character and becoming their own person and not letting other people dictate who they think they should be and letting themselves decide who they want to be. I love that. And of course the dragons, the wars and battles on an epic scale, and the magic system, just, oh. Kaelin is a great main character, a chosen one trope. Again, all of the characters of the different races, so the elves, the dwarves, the trolls, the uruks, the humans, like everyone needing to try and come together to fight the evil of the world. And I always love that. We have a lot of found family in here, and I love seeing the character growth that we're getting, especially with Dan and Farda. I am very interested to see how these characters continue to grow and which direction they choose for themselves. If you have not read the series yet, what are you waiting for? It's so good. And I'm waiting, I have The Fall and of Blood and Fire. I'm waiting for the Broken Binding to come out with the next couple of books. So I'm waiting for the Of Darkness and Light and The Exile, and then Of War and Ruin and The Ice, and then of course of Empires and Dust comes out in 2025. And then we'll have one more novella and then one more book. For next in a series, I read Camp Half-Blood Confidential by Rick Riordan, and this is book 2.5 in the Trials of Apollo series, and this was so much fun. I loved going back to Camp Half-Blood and being with Percy and Annabeth and Nico and Will and all of the super fun campers. They're having a little discussion and they're talking about, so if you could change something about the camp, what would it be? And Nico throws out, oh my gosh, get rid of that stupid orientation video. That definitely has to be redone. It is so outdated. And everyone else is like, what orientation video? Did you see one? I didn't see one. There's an orientation video? And so they go back and they watch it and they're like, oh my gosh. So this is something Apollo made back in the 50s. It is so funny. So you have all of these characters kind of watching and commentating on the video and then putting in their little snippets of what they would change and what it would be, so creating a new orientation packet instead. And it's just very cute, very fun, and it was a nice light-hearted change to the big high epic fantasies that I had been reading. And then we moved into my D20 roll where I got a 7, and I had to read Shadowsong, which is the second book in the Wintersong duology by S.J. Jones. And this is such an atmospheric series. It is just so beautifully written and it just flows so nicely. It's almost lyrical, which makes sense because there's a lot of music written, or musicality written throughout both books, and especially this one. And I love that theme continued through both of the books, as the main characters, the main girl is a composer and she also plays piano and can sing, and then her brother plays a beautiful violin, and this pretty much picks up not too long after the first book ends. And there's some interesting new characters that add quite a bit to the story, add a little mystery to the story. So there's some twists and reveals, there's some heartwarming but yet also some heartbreaking points in the book. And it is just beautiful overall, and the audiobook narrators did a beautiful job. That one was 4.5 stars. Next, I had to read my most recent purchase at the time of my TBR-opoly game, and that was A Tempest of Tea by Hafsa Faisal. And this was great. I enjoyed this one a lot. It's a fun yet somewhat intense heist story with lots of twists and turns. Although, so I do love me a really good heist, kind of like the Six of Crows duology, which I have back here on my shelves. I think I read that twice in the same year. I read it at the beginning of the year, and then I read it again at the end of that year because it was just so good. I love it. But this one, the heist is a very small portion of the book, and even like the build up to it and then the heist itself and then what happens right afterwards is a somewhat small portion of the book. So we have lady that owns a little tea shop, and in the morning it is tea for everyone in the area to enjoy with lovely little pastries, and then in the evening they do a really quick turnaround and it is now, instead of tea, they serve blood to the vampires of the area, so they do not have to drink upon humans. They can come and get blood at this tea shop. And then, of course, at the end, they do a quick turnaround again and open for everyone again in the morning for tea and pastries. I would have liked a little bit more world building, but I did give this one 4 stars, but I would have liked a little bit more world building because it isn't necessarily quite set in our world, so it would have been nice to have a little bit more going on there. But what we got was good and very interesting, and I did enjoy all of the characters. I think the pacing was pretty good throughout, and the writing style was really easy to read. And I am interested to see what direction the next book takes. Like, where is it going to go? Because the ending was like, what? And so I want to see what's going to happen next. Next was a TBR jar, and I pulled out Suspending Reality. And that is by Chrissy Peoples, and this is a 5 first books in series. So she takes her first book in 5 different series and puts them into one little compilation, and she includes a couple little novellas along with it. And I did end up reading the entire book. I did start this a little bit early, so I started it at the end of July because I had finished all of my July TBR. So I did read the first novella and the first 2 books, I believe, in July, and the rest of it I finished in August. And my goal was to just read one of the books, so I was happy with being able to get through the whole thing. They're definitely popcorn reads, just that quick and easy to read guilty pleasure type of books, and I would probably continue with most of the books except for one or two. My favorite was actually the very first novella, and it was just a little standalone novella, I believe. I'm not sure if there's more to the world or not, but that one was the most interesting. And then my least favorite was actually the last book that was included, and it was okay. I probably wouldn't, I wasn't intrigued enough to want to move on to the next book. But the other ones, I would probably, if I had them, I would read them. If I don't, I'm not going to go out of my way to find them. Some of these books, like, they're super short, they're under 300 pages, and then they put like 5 to 9 books in the series. Personally, I would rather have them a little bit longer, and so you get a little more character building or world building and a little more with the plot in each book than just having quick little 250 page books that, I mean, I get it. It's kind of like the whole little soap opera thing, or the Harlequin romances where they're super quick and easy and you can just bust through a bunch of them. But I do like my high epic fantasy, so I do wish they were a little bit longer. Overall, I did give it 4 stars. The last book I'd probably give just a flat 3-star. The first novella, close, not a 5-star, but it's definitely a 4-star, maybe a little over. So average of all of them, 4 stars. And then lastly, for my TBR-opoly, was to read a cozy book. And for that, I read A Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan. And this is the first book in the Memoirs of Lady Trent series. And I love this book. 5 stars. It was so good. It was so much fun. The audiobook narrator did such a good job. I would call it definitely a little cozy read. At one point, I was interested in becoming an archaeologist, so I definitely find this kind of book interesting. And I loved that the physical book had a bunch of sketches in it of some of the different creatures, and I thought that was beautiful. And the audiobook, again, was done so well. It was great to have them both together. I think the characters were interesting, and I liked how the diversity and the situations that were happening, like how some of the characters interacted with each other and the expectations of some of the characters fit well in the time period. Not necessarily with our time period right now, but in the time when it was supposedly happening, it felt real for that time. And I really enjoyed some of the mystery that was included, and the interaction with some of the characters and the relationships were just beautiful. And I can't wait to pick up the second book. I think it's either Serpent or the Basilisk, one of those. I definitely want to get to that soon. And my library does have them, so I need to pick those up. Okay, so that was the 12 books I read. 13 prompts, but I doubled up on 2. So the 12 books that I read for my TBR-opoly, but then the extra books that I read for my readathons. And you can see more in-depth reviews for these in my August Readathon wrap-up, which again I will leave in the description box below, and I have up in the cards at the beginning of the video. But Talks Like Thunder by Randall Nurhus and Marjorie Carter. That one I did give 4 stars to. It was about the Native Americans at the time when they were forced to go onto reservations, as well as being forced into the schools at the time. It was very well written, it was easy to read, and I enjoyed it. I also read Storm Dragons, and this one was my only 3-star of the month. And that one was 3.5 stars. It just needed a little more world building, a little more characterization, and it felt a little disjointed, jumping back and forth between present and past, kind of between like the present reality and the storytelling that was happening by the father to the son. And it was a little too jarring going back and forth. It needed a little bit better transition between the two. But otherwise, the story was interesting, characters were interesting, and I would love to know more. One of the other books I read was The World of Poo, and this is by Terry Pratchett, and it's the 39.5 book, 39th and a half book in the Discworld series, and it was just adorable. So cute. All about animal scat. And a young boy wanting to learn about it, and his grandmother indulging him and being so supportive and amazing to her grandson. And I think that was one of my favorite things about the book, is just how supportive the grandmother was in the endeavors that her grandson wanted to learn about. Thought it was great. The next one that I finished was Knife of Dreams by Robert Jordan, the 11th book in the Wheel of Time series, and it was back to being amazing. 4.5 stars. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Back to a little bit faster pacing and a little more happening and things moving forward, which was great. And then lastly, for the TBR Requestathon Readathon, I did read the group book, and that was The Return of the Knights by Gregory Contaxis. And this is the first book in Dance of Light series. And this one was really interesting. I did give it 4 stars. It was really good. But one of the characters, it's kind of like that hot-headed, fly off the handle thinking instead of thinking through, which is a realistic thing. We all do that at some point, but he consistently did it. He wasn't learning and growing and figuring things out in that regard, and made a mess of things sometimes. So that was a little annoying that it kept happening. I wanted to see a little bit of a change there, but yeah. That was more of a me thing than anything else, not liking that kind of trope. But he is a chosen one, and we have the knights used to be this big deal, so everybody wanted to be a knight, and then somehow they became corrupt and they disbanded the knights and no one was allowed to be a knight anymore. And it's been many years now, and they are still fighting the big bad Walter, which I love, such a mundane name for the villain. And they have to fight the big bad Walter, and so they are bringing back the knights. I liked how the book progressed through the story and the different characters that came about and the mythology aspect that was included in it. And I am interested in seeing what happens in the second book, because it doesn't quite resolve everything, and so it kind of leaves you a little bit like, okay, where is this going to go next? So I will probably pick this one up at some point. And then that was all the books that I read in August. Let's move on into the stats. Right, so in August, I read 17 books, and that came to 8,084 pages, almost 203 hours of audiobooks listened to. And my shortest book was 44 pages, and that was Storm Dragons by L.S. Rees and Frank Fernandez. My shortest audiobook was just over an hour long, and that was The Sleeper the Spindle by Neil Gaiman. I did also get the physical book from my library, which I highly recommend because the artwork is beautiful and adds a lot to the story. Then my longest book at 1,483 pages and longest audiobook at just under 45 hours was Of War and Ruin by Ryan Cahill. The first book I read was Suspending Reality by Chrissy Peoples, and the last book I read was The Return of the Knights by Gregory Contaxis. My least favorite was Storm Dragons at 3.5 stars, and my favorite was Of War and Ruin at 5 stars. My favorite character, I think, was actually Commander Vimes. He was just super fun in Snuff, and I thoroughly enjoyed that book. My favorite author has to be my favorite book, and so that is Ryan Cahill, although it was pretty close with David Estes. Those two, I do really enjoy both. They have a little bit different writing style, but I really like both of them. My favorite series, again, has to be The Bound and the Broken, although Kingfall Histories is a close second. My favorite movie that we watched in August was The Fastest Indian, and that is with Anthony Hopkins, and it's about the Indian motorcycle from the 60s. I believe it was based in the 60s, and Anthony Hopkins plays a gentleman from New Zealand that comes to America to become one of the fastest motorcycles in the world at the time and break the speed records. It was a very good movie. Highly recommend it. Favorite TV series? Absolutely Cobra Kai. Love that series. Growing up, I had a poster of Ralph Macchio on my wall. And I loved The Karate Kid. I watched all 3 of The Karate Kids, plus the next Karate Kid with Hilary Swank in it. And just, I love them. And I watched the next Karate Kid with, that was done by Will Smith, and it had Jackie Chan in it, and then Will Smith's son. I love The Karate Kid. Yeah, and so Cobra Kai is just amazing, and I still am amazed at just that they got all of the original actors for all of the episodes, like throughout, like all the main female characters were in there from each of the movies. All of the villains from each of the movies, the original actors were all in it. I just think that is amazing. I keep waiting and hoping Hilary Swank's going to show up somewhere just because she was in the next Karate Kid. I mean, her and Ralph Macchio never met, but I still think it would be really fun if she ends up in there. And of course, I'm sad. We just watched the last episode, but there's more coming in November. So gotta wait for a while, but there is hope. Favorite YouTuber for August was Katie Callaway. She does some productivity and lifestyle videos, and I think they are just so they're informative, but they're also relaxing and kind of fun, and she is just a great human being in general, and I will leave her channel linked down below if you want to check her out. Star ratings. I had 1 3-star. I had 12 4-star books, and that was broken down into 7 4-stars and 5 4.5 stars. And then I actually had 4 5-star books. When I was counting my 5-star books earlier with the 6 of them, that was for Battleathon, where I rounded up some of my 4.5 stars because they were close to the 5-star ranking. They were like 4.75 stars. I did count that one wrong, so I did get 4 5-star books, which was amazing. And that was Of War and Ruin, Nightfall, A Natural History of Dragons, and Snuff. 76% of my books had diversity in them, which is wonderful, and that is definitely up from previous months, so I'm glad I'm getting a little more diversity in the content of my books. And then genres. So I read 14 fantasy, which is 82% of my books. Not a shocker there. 1 sci-fi, 1 classic, and 1 historical book. I had no nonfiction, so that's not good. I try and do at least 1 nonfiction every month, so, but I do have 2 in September, so that'll make up for it a little bit, or at least even itself out. For source, I had no just audio, so audio alone, I didn't have any, which was interesting. I had 4 ebooks. I had 2 physical books, and the other 11 books were a mixture of either audio and ebook or audio and physical book. I did have 4 audiobooks that were also digital, and then I had 7 audiobooks that I also had physically to read. For my format, I had 11 novels, which was 73% of my reading, and then I had 1 novella, 2 graphic novels, and 1 anthology, which was Suspending Reality. For audience, I had no children's books, which was nice. I had 1 middle grade, which was the World of Poo, and that was adorable. And then I had 7 YA and 9 adult books, which made up 53% of my reading, which is understandable as I am an adult. For my series, I did start 12 series. Part of that was because of Suspending Reality, and that was an anthology of 5 first books in a series, so that makes sense. I did continue with 6 series, so that's good, and I did complete 1 series, which was great, and that was the Winter Song duology. And then I had 2 standalones. 53% of my books I did get from my library, and 47 were owned books. For publication, I read 5 self-published and 4 independently published, and then 8 traditional books. So I'm liking that that's evening itself out a little bit, so kind of half and half. So overall I had 9 indie self-pub and then 8 traditional, which is really fun. For authors, I read 1 debut, which was The Fangs of War by E.J. Doble, and then I read 11 books from authors I had read before, which makes sense because I'm trying to continue series. And then I read 5 books that had authors that were new to me. So technically 6 that were new because of the 1 debut. And that is all of my stats for August and all the books that I read. It was a very good reading month, and I thoroughly enjoyed all of the books that I read. Even my 3.5, I thought it was interesting and enjoyed it. It was such a great reading month. How did you do in August? Did you have a lot of really good reads, or did you have some duds in there? It's okay to have some duds every once in a while. I feel like it helps you to figure out what books you really like. Because sometimes you'll go into a book thinking, I'm going to love this book, and you're like, no, that was not for me. And you can kind of figure out why it wasn't for you and what about it you didn't like. So maybe it was the writing style, maybe it was the genre of it was just kind of meh, maybe just the book was kind of a meh book and nobody really likes it. Who knows? Helps you to learn a little bit more about your personal reading tastes. Did you have any 5-star reads for the month? And if you did, let me know down in the comments below, because I would love to check them out and give them a read myself. And thank you so much for joining me today as I went through my August stats and wrap up. So please like, comment, and subscribe if you want to, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any other bookish content. And please check out the description box for the links to some of the other YouTubers that I follow, as well as to David Estie's Kickstarter for Fate Marked that should be starting soon, in case you want to support that one. I also have links to my Goodreads and Storygraph there. And I can't wait to see you again in my next video. So until then, keep reading. Bye!